The millionaire served his mistress a feast, while his pregnant wife starved. Now he works for her. Have you ever seen karma strike with the power of a hurricane, where a man's betrayal spirals so out of control that the one he hurt the most becomes the very person who holds his future? This is the riveting story of James White, a man who thought he could have it all: devotion from his pregnant wife, Elena, and forbidden passion from his mistress, Victoria Chen. He served lavish feasts to the other woman while his wife starved both emotionally and literally. Little did he know fate was watching. When karma finally arrives, it doesn't knock, it tears his world apart, piece by piece. James White grew up in the small, close-knit town of Hawthorne Hills. The place brimmed with polite nods, neighborly waves, and the occasional town gossip. He was the only child of Teresa White, a single mother who held down 3 jobs to put food on the table. Because of his modest upbringing, James developed an insatiable hunger for success and validation. He promised himself that one day he would climb above the humble life he knew as a child. In contrast, Elena Ramirez was born into a large, boisterous family in the city of Clearwater Bay, just a few hours away from Hawthorne Hills. She had 6 siblings, parents who adored her, and an atmosphere of unconditional support. Elena learned from an early age that loyalty and family came first. She believed in the goodness of people, possibly to a fault. When Elena moved to Hawthorne Hills for a teaching position at the local elementary school, she and James crossed paths at a charity fundraiser for local school supplies. He was there as part of a local business outreach, representing the insurance firm where he worked. She was there looking to support her new workplace. Sparks flew almost immediately. James was enthralled by Elena's warmth, her smile that could rival the sun, and her unwavering desire to help those around her. Elena found James to be funny, charming, and driven, an underdog determined to rise. Their courtship was swift but passionate. Within 6 months, they were engaged, and another 6 months later, married in a modest but heartfelt ceremony on Elena's parents' farmland near Clearwater Bay. Despite his humble background, James had begun to earn a respectable salary as a junior executive. He saw the marriage as another marker of success. He had a loyal wife who was beautiful, accomplished, and intelligent. Elena, meanwhile, believed she had found her soulmate, a man who had known struggle but fought through it to make a better life. They moved into a small suburban house in Hawthorne Hills, a step up from the dingy apartment James had once called home. In the early days of their marriage, it seemed as though fate had smiled on them. They'd spend quiet evenings in the living room, Elena grading papers while James prepared for his next big pitch at the insurance firm. Weekends were reserved for family barbecues, day trips to the lake, or sometimes just lazing around on the couch, binge-watching their favorite shows. Life was steady and predictable, the kind of security James had yearned for, and the kind of domestic bliss Elena had always dreamed about. But beneath the shiny facade, fault lines formed. James was ambitious, hungry for the bigger house, the faster car, the luxurious vacations he'd never had as a kid. Elena, for her part, was content with life's simpler pleasures: a warm, welcoming home, health, and family. Though they never argued loudly about these differences, the tension was palpable. James wanted more, always more. Elena sometimes wondered if she was enough for him. A year and a half into their marriage, Elena discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with a radiant happiness. She imagined a child growing up with the same loving foundation she had known, albeit with 1 sibling instead of 6. When she told James, tears of joy sprang to his eyes, but there was a flicker of concern behind them. Fatherhood was a big responsibility. It could derail his fast track to professional success. Still, he put on a brave face for his wife. He told her they would handle it. They had love, and they had each other. For a few months, James doted on Elena. He drove her to prenatal appointments, rushed home from work to cook simple meals, and even talked about setting up a college fund. But as the pregnancy advanced, so did the responsibilities and the expenses. Elena required better healthcare, vitamins, and preparations for the baby's arrival. James felt the pinch and began staying later at the office, hoping to stand out and climb the corporate ladder faster. It was around this time that he met Victoria Chen, someone who would soon bring their entire world crashing down. Victoria Chen was the epitome of effortless grace. Hailing from a well-connected family in Hong Kong, her parents had relocated to the country to expand their business. By the time Victoria finished college, she had a trust fund large enough to buy the entire town of Hawthorne Hills. Instead, she chose a path that allowed her to exercise her own skills in real estate development, using her family's network to build a thriving empire. James first encountered Victoria at a networking event hosted by his insurance firm. She arrived late, her presence practically turning every head in the room, men and women alike. Dressed in a sleek black blazer and perfectly tailored trousers, she exuded a level of confidence that James had only ever dreamed of. Their first conversation was about property insurance, but it quickly drifted to personal interests. James noticed her watch, a classic limited edition piece worth more than he made in several months. Victoria noticed his ambition, the hunger in his eyes. What began as a few casual phone calls about policy details rapidly morphed into flirtatious texts. Victoria, unburdened by the usual constraints of a regular job, had all the time in the world to dangle possibilities before James. She invited him to private soirees where elite business owners mingled over champagne and caviar. For a man like James, who had grown up at the bottom rung of the social ladder, this was intoxicating. In Victoria's circle, he felt like he was finally living the life he deserved, rubbing elbows with CEOs, forging lucrative partnerships, and dreaming of a future far more lavish than the quiet suburban existence he shared with Elena. But it wasn't just about business. Victoria herself intrigued him. She moved with a feline elegance, her eyes constantly scanning a room as if picking out her next prey. Her wit was razor-sharp, and she could pepper any conversation with just enough charm and innuendo to leave James breathless. He knew she was flirting. Deep down he understood it was wrong he had a pregnant wife at home. Yet he rationalized his actions, telling himself this was just harmless flirting, a way to boost his career prospects. Elena, meanwhile, began to notice changes in James's routine. He started coming home later and later, always with a new excuse: work dinners, client meetings, urgent proposals. He'd bury his nose in his phone during weekends, texting or emailing incessantly. Though Elena's instincts whispered that something was off, she never imagined it could be another woman. She told herself he was simply more dedicated to his work because they had a child on the way. She wanted so badly to believe her husband was striving for their shared future. When James landed a significant insurance deal with one of Victoria's real estate projects, he felt invincible. His boss, Frederick O'Neill, praised him openly in front of the entire firm. Bonuses and promotions seemed just around the corner. Victoria called him that evening to congratulate him privately, insisting they celebrate. He hesitated only momentarily before accepting her invitation to an upscale lounge in the city, a place so exclusive that Elena couldn't have entered without a VIP pass. Under the neon lights and seductive jazz music, one drink led to another. Victoria's leg brushed against James's under the table, and he did nothing to move away. He told himself it was just business, just a bit of fun. But the heated stares they exchanged said otherwise. At the end of the night, she leaned in, the faint smell of her perfume filling his senses, and whispered, "You're different from the other men around me, James. I like it." She let her fingertips graze his hand before sauntering off, leaving him breathless and wanting more. Back home, Elena was asleep. James stared at her swollen belly and felt a mixture of guilt and suppressed annoyance. He was on the brink of something big, a chance to climb the social ladder. Why did she have to be pregnant now, slowing him down with doctor's appointments and budget talks about cribs and diapers? The fleeting sense of guilt eroded in the face of ambition. He was so close to breaking free from the shackles of his modest past. Within weeks, James and Victoria's friendship evolved. It was no longer just business dinners. They'd meet in private corners of fancy hotels, exchanging hushed conversations and increasingly intimate gestures. Every time James tiptoed in after midnight, Elena would confront him. He'd offer half-truths, say he was finalizing a major deal. She wanted to trust him, she had to. He was her husband, the father of her unborn child. But a subtle change in him was becoming impossible to ignore. Once generous with attention, James now seemed distant, impatient, and perpetually on edge. Then came the night of the big real estate convention at the Grand Vista Hotel. It was a swanky gala featuring major players in development, finance, and insurance. James told Elena he needed to be there all night, possibly into the early morning. Pregnant and alone, Elena cooked herself a simple meal and prayed for her husband's safe return. She had no idea that across town, James was indulging in the luxury of Victoria's penthouse suite, feasting on gourmet dishes while she struggled to keep down her own meager dinner. Just after the real estate convention, the dynamic between James and Victoria soared to new heights. She showered him with gifts, an expensive watch here, an Italian leather briefcase there, tickets to exclusive sporting events. With every new possession, James felt more and more ensnared, but he also felt his sense of importance swell. He was part of a world he had only fantasized about. The more he immersed himself in it, the more ordinary his life with Elena seemed. The whispered "I love you" before bedtime started to feel like a rote obligation. Elena, now heavily pregnant, struggled alone. Morning sickness evolved into near-constant nausea, coupled with back pain that made standing in front of her classroom for hours at a time a challenge. Her colleagues offered help, but she longed for her husband's support. James, however, was perpetually busy. Calls from Victoria or her associates kept him occupied even during the rare moments he was physically present at home. Tense arguments punctuated their evenings. Elena would ask simple questions. "Can you help me with my prenatal vitamins?" Or, "Will you come to the doctor's appointment next week?" James would either snap about being exhausted from work or dodge the question entirely with empty promises. She tried to communicate her worries. James the first feel like "I'm going through this pregnancy alone," but he'd brush it off, calling her dramatic. "I'm doing all this for you and the baby," he'd retort, as if it were justification enough for his absence. Their bank account, oddly enough, began to look more robust. James started contributing more money toward household bills, pacifying Elena's concerns about financial stability. She interpreted it as a sign of his dedication to their expanding family. Little did she know that this sudden influx was funded by under-the-table perks from Victoria, who lavished him with commissions and undisclosed bonuses in exchange for preferential insurance deals and insider tips on local developments. As James's moral compass skewed off course, Elena's trust in him wobbled precariously. One afternoon, while rummaging through old receipts in the study, Elena stumbled upon an invoice for a high-end restaurant, one she knew they had never visited together. Candlelight dinners, $100 entrees. This was not their usual frugal date night. Confronting James that evening, she demanded an explanation. He fumbled, spat out a story about entertaining potential clients, and ended up blaming her for snooping. The deflection cut deep into Elena's heart, but she forced herself to believe his words. She was nearly 8 months pregnant. This was no time to indulge in suspicion or confrontation. She needed stability. It was around this time that a new character entered the scene, Elena's childhood friend, Carmen Delgado, a nurse who worked at Clearwater Bay Medical Center. Carmen had kept in touch with Elena sporadically, but upon hearing that Elena was pregnant, she decided to visit more frequently. When Carmen saw Elena's fragile emotional state, she became suspicious of James's behavior. Carmen had known Elena her whole life. She could read her like an open book. "Are you sure everything's okay, honey?" she asked gently. Elena tried to lie, to maintain the facade that her marriage was stable, but the tears in her eyes betrayed her. Carmen began discreetly asking around about James. Through a colleague who had contacts in Hawthorne Hills business circles, she heard rumors about James's close association with the wealthy real estate developer Victoria Chen. Although nothing was overtly scandalous in the rumors, there was enough smoke to suggest a hidden fire. Unwilling to hurt Elena, Carmen hesitated to speak up, but the sinking feeling in her gut told her she needed to protect her friend if the worst were true. While Elena struggled with her mounting suspicions and increasing vulnerability, James found himself drawn deeper into Victoria's orbit. She introduced him to even more influential people: an investor from Dubai, a politician from the state capital, each opening doors that promised James the financial success he had chased his entire life. As he juggled these illicit opportunities, a sense of invincibility grew within him. He believed he could manage it all: the wife, the mistress, the unborn child, and the swirling ambitions that taunted him with every new taste of luxury. But cracks were showing, and no matter how meticulously James tried to seal them, the foundation of his life was beginning to crumble. All it would take was one catastrophic event to expose his secrets and shatter the illusion he had so carefully cultivated. The turning point came on a chilly November evening. Elena was in her 9th month of pregnancy, teetering on the edge of exhaustion and plagued by persistent abdominal cramps that flared up whenever she stood for too long. Despite her condition, she forced herself to prepare a simple dinner at home: soup and bread that would soothe her unsettled stomach. James, as usual, claimed he'd be late. "Business dinner," he had texted that morning. "Don't wait up." What he didn't tell Elena was that he wasn't just grabbing a quick meal with clients. He was preparing to host a lavish private dinner for Victoria at her newly acquired countryside villa. The property was an estate of sprawling gardens and marble pillars, a trophy piece she had purchased recently. Eager to impress her, James took it upon himself to hire a world-class chef known for decadent-tasting menus. He insisted on having fresh lobster flown in, along with imported truffles and a vintage champagne that cost more than some people's monthly rent. Every detail was orchestrated to showcase extravagance. Victoria arrived that night in a figure-hugging black cocktail dress, her hair swept up in a sophisticated chignon. As soon as she entered, James helped her remove her coat, brushing against her shoulder with intimate familiarity. She flashed him a seductive smile, while waitstaff bustled about, preparing the table with fine china and crystal glassware. James felt a surge of pride. This, he thought, was where he belonged, among the elite, the powerful, the ones who carved the world in their image. For a moment, he forgot about the wife who lay at home, hungry and alone. As dinner commenced, the chef served course after course: lobster bisque, seared foie gras, filet mignon with truffle sauce, a delicate sorbet cleanser, and finally an ornate dessert shaped like a blooming rose. Each dish was paired with a rare wine or champagne, each sip and bite designed to awaken the senses. Victoria lavished James with praise, telling him how impressed she was by his sense of style, his ambition, and his devotion to her. They laughed freely, toasted their success, and in between flirtatious banter, stole kisses in the corridors when the servers weren't looking. Meanwhile, back at the suburban house, Elena could barely keep her soup down. The cramps had grown more severe, radiating pain across her lower back. She found herself lying on the couch, phone in hand, praying for a text or call from James. She tried calling him multiple times. Each went straight to voicemail. Worried about her baby and feeling utterly forsaken, she decided to order a taxi to the hospital just to be safe. She dialed Carmen's number, hoping her nurse friend could advise her. Carmen, alarmed by the distress in Elena's voice, rushed over. By the time she arrived, Elena was doubled over in agony. Carmen helped Elena into her car and drove her to Hawthorne Hills Medical Center. The journey felt interminable, Elena clutching her belly, tears streaking her face. She was terrified for her baby. What if the worst was happening and James wasn't there to support her? Carmen stayed by her side, urging her to breathe, reminding her that everything would be okay. At the countryside villa, the feast was drawing to a close. James's phone vibrated repeatedly on a side table, but he was too lost in Victoria's attention to notice. When dessert was finished, Victoria led James to a secluded part of the garden, illuminated by softly glowing lanterns. "There," she whispered sweet nothings, and teased him about how lucky he was to have her. In a haze of lust and self-importance, he embraced her. All the while, messages from Carmen and Elena went unanswered. Eventually, James excused himself to use the restroom and glanced at his phone. The notifications displayed missed calls from Elena and frantic texts from Carmen. Carmen 8:45 p.m. James, Elena's in the hospital. She's in labor or having complications. Call me back. Elena 9:02 p.m. James, please come. I need you. He felt the blood drain from his face. Panic welled up inside him. Victoria noticed the change in his demeanor when he stepped back into the dining area. "Is everything all right?" she asked, her tone revealing more curiosity than concern. James fumbled to explain, saying Elena was at the hospital. He grabbed his coat in a hurry, stammering that he had to leave. Victoria only offered a nonchalant shrug. "Go deal with it," she said dismissively. "I'll be fine." James sprinted to his car, weaving through dark roads to get to Hawthorne Hills Medical Center. A dozen scenarios plagued his mind. What if Elena lost the baby? What if something terrible happened? Would he be to blame? His mind spun with guilt and fear, a stark contrast to the euphoric high he'd basked in just an hour before. When he arrived, he found Elena hooked up to monitors, tears still streaming down her cheeks. Carmen holding her hand. The doctor was conducting tests to ensure both mother and child were safe. At the sight of James, Elena's eyes filled with relief and anger all at once. "Where were you?" she choked out between sobs. James mumbled, "Work, there was a last-minute meeting. I couldn't get away." The lie sounded hollow even to his own ears. Though mother and baby were ultimately deemed stable, the incident exposed the extent of James's negligence. The emotional feast he had shared with Victoria contrasted painfully with the stark reality that Elena had nearly faced a pregnancy emergency alone, sustaining herself on nothing but cold soup and frayed nerves. The illusion of control James had maintained was cracking. It would not be long before it shattered entirely. Elena returned home from the hospital a few days later, her health somewhat stabilized, but her spirit deeply wounded. The near scare had taken a toll on her body, and she found herself crying at the smallest triggers, an empty cradle still in its box, a half-finished baby blanket she'd been knitting, and particularly the memory of waiting helplessly in the hospital corridor, wondering if she was about to lose everything. Despite his guilt, James tried to maintain the appearance of a devoted husband. He made excuses for his repeated absences, insisted that work emergencies were out of his control, and even apologized for missing Elena's calls. But his words rang hollow. The emotional chasm between them expanded daily, fueled by Elena's newfound anxiety and James's evasiveness. Carmen, who was visiting regularly, saw the strain on Elena's face. She decided to confront James when she found him alone in the kitchen one morning. "Look," she began, her voice trembling with anger, "I don't know what's going on with you, but Elena deserves better. You almost lost her the other night. She needed you, and you weren't there." James, defensively crossing his arms, shot back. "I said, I'm sorry, okay? I've got responsibilities at work that you couldn't possibly understand." Carmen glared at him. "Don't for a second think I don't understand responsibility. I'm a nurse. I see life and death every day. My responsibility is to my patients. Yours is to your pregnant wife. Or have you forgotten that?" With that, she stormed out, leaving James feeling exposed. He hated being judged by someone like Carmen, who had no inkling of the aspirations coursing through his veins. He told himself he was doing this all for his family. Yet, deep down, he knew that wasn't entirely true. His hunger for success had overshadowed his vows. Elena felt the tension between her husband and her friend, but was too emotionally exhausted to intervene. All she could do was focus on carrying her pregnancy to term safely. She considered leaving, returning to her parents' home in Clearwater Bay, but her pride and lingering love for James held her back. She clung to the hope that this was just a rough patch, that once the baby arrived, James would come to his senses. Days stretched into weeks. One late afternoon, as Elena sat in the nursery, folding newly washed baby clothes, her phone chimed. It was a message from an unknown number. "Ask your husband about Victoria Chen. Ask him how many nights he spent at her new villa. You deserve to know." A concerned friend. Elena's heart pounded, her throat constricting. She read and reread the message. Had her suspicions been right all along, or was this some cruel prank? She glanced at the crib in the corner, empty but full of promise. Tears threatened to spill, but she forced herself to remain calm. The baby's well-being depended on her emotional stability. By the time James walked in that evening, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows through the hallway. Elena stood in the living room, arms crossed. "I got a message today," she said, her voice cold. "It mentioned a woman named Victoria Chen, someone who apparently owns a new villa that you know very well." James froze. A moment of panic crossed his face before he mustered a stoic expression. "That's ridiculous. Probably a disgruntled client or a jealous co-worker. Don't believe everything you read." But the quickening of his pulse betrayed him. Elena stared at him, her eyes brimming with hurt. "Don't lie to me, James. Not anymore. I'm your wife, and I'm carrying your child. If there's something you need to tell me, now's the time." He debated confessing, letting it all spill out: his affair, his ambition, his toxic entanglement with Victoria, but cowardice won out. He offered vague reassurances and even mustered feigned indignation that anyone would dare slander him like that. Elena wasn't convinced. Silence hung between them for a moment, an unspoken acknowledgement of the rapidly collapsing trust. Finally, she said, "I'm almost due. I can't deal with this right now. But know this, if you betray me, I won't just stand by." With that, she turned and walked away, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. A sliver of shame cut through James. Yet that very night, his phone lit up with a text from Victoria. "Deal closed. Huge payoff. Celebrate with me?" He hesitated for only a moment before replying, "Yes." It was as if two versions of James existed, the guilt-ridden husband and the ambitious opportunist. The line between them was fading fast, leaving Elena in a state of quiet desolation. Though her heart felt heavy, a seed of resolve began to take root inside her. She would protect her child, and if James refused to stand by her, she would stand alone. December arrived with an unexpected snowfall in Hawthorne Hills. The roads and rooftops glistened, the air biting cold. Elena was now at full term, her belly stretched to its limit. She had scheduled a final checkup with her obstetrician, Dr. Marcus Lee, who assured her she was in the clear for a normal delivery if all went well. Yet the tension at home made every day feel like walking on a tightrope. The first contractions began in the pre-dawn hours of a Tuesday. Elena woke with a start, her sheets damp from perspiration. She reached for James, only to realize he wasn't there. He had spent the night at an urgent work meeting again. Heart pounding, she fumbled for her phone, dialed James's number. Voicemail. She then called Carmen, who instantly agreed to come over. By the time they reached Hawthorne Hills Medical Center, Elena's contractions had escalated. Nurses wheeled her into a delivery room. Monitors beeped, staff hustled in and out, and Carmen squeezed Elena's hand in unwavering support. Elena cried tears of fear, pain, and betrayal. She wanted James by her side, even if her trust in him was eroding. He was still the father of her child. Meanwhile, James groggily checked his phone at 7:30. After a night spent at a luxury hotel suite near the city, Victoria slumbered beside him, the duvet barely covering her slender figure. He saw multiple missed calls and frantic texts from Carmen. "Elena's in labor. Where are you?" Panic shattered his morning haze. He scrambled to dress, ignoring Victoria's lazy question, "Leaving so soon?" He drove recklessly through the snowy roads, nearly spinning out of control once, until he finally skidded into the hospital parking lot. When he burst into the maternity ward, Elena was already in active labor. Her face was contorted in pain, hair plastered to her forehead with sweat. She shot him a glare that combined heartbreak and raw anger. No words were exchanged, there wasn't time. Nurses rushed James into scrubs, and he took hold of Elena's hand. She didn't push him away, even in her rage. She needed him at that moment, if only to share the agony. The birth was long and grueling. Elena was exhausted from stress and insufficient rest over the past few weeks. Each contraction felt like a wave threatening to drown her. James whispered apologies, though she could barely process them. Eventually, after hours of labor, a piercing cry filled the delivery room. It was a girl. Elena collapsed into relieved sobs as the nurse placed the newborn on her chest. James, tears in his eyes, gently touched the baby's tiny fingers. For a fleeting moment, pure emotion replaced all their bitterness. The new parents named their daughter Aurora, meaning dawn, a hope for a new beginning. But reality intruded as soon as Elena was moved to a recovery room. While she rested, drained from labor, James stepped out to grab coffee. Carmen found him standing by a vending machine, staring blankly at the assortment of snacks. "You almost missed your daughter's birth," Carmen hissed. "I'm only going to say this once. If you walk away from Elena now, you'll regret it for the rest of your life." James nodded, seemingly chastened, but deep inside, a whirlwind of emotions threatened to overwhelm him: love for his newborn child, guilt over his betrayal, anxiety over maintaining his double life, and yes, a lingering pull toward Victoria's world. Elena stayed in the hospital for 2 days. During that time, James tried to act the doting husband, bringing flowers, swaddling the baby under a nurse's supervision, and cooing at Aurora. Elena observed him quietly, her eyes distant. She wanted so badly to believe that James's presence here was a sign he'd changed, but her instincts warned her, don't trust too easily. Upon returning home, they entered a new reality. Newborn cries punctuated their nights, turning them into bleary-eyed caretakers. Elena focused on recovery, on learning how to breastfeed, on changing diapers at 3 a.m. James initially pitched in, but soon the demands of work, real or fabricated, pried him away. His late-night texts to Victoria resumed, sprinkled in between the occasional baby photo he posted on social media to maintain appearances. Elena, a teacher by nature, had taken maternity leave. Days blurred together, filled with the chaos of caring for a newborn alone. Her parents visited occasionally, but James's side of the family was less involved. Teresa White had moved to Florida, and James rarely kept in touch. The tension between husband and wife transformed their once cozy home into a silent battleground. Elena grew resentful of how James could vanish for hours or even days without any real explanation beyond work. She wanted to scream at him, to demand the truth, but each time she tried, he'd brush her off or accuse her of nagging. One afternoon, after an especially grueling night up with the baby, Elena stumbled upon a purchase receipt in James's coat pocket, a lavish necklace from a high-end jewelry store in the city. Her eyes widened. She hadn't received any such gift. The price tag alone was enough to fund their mortgage payments for a month. Her hands shook, so it was true. He was still seeing Victoria, feeding her vanity with opulent gifts. And here Elena was, scraping by, feeling guilty if she asked for help with groceries or baby supplies. Elena took Aurora in her arms, tear tracks staining her cheeks. She understood now that James was irretrievably caught in another life, a life that didn't include her or their daughter. Something in Elena hardened that day. She resolved that if James wasn't going to be the partner and father she needed him to be, she would forge ahead alone, and if that meant severing ties, so be it. The weeks following Aurora's birth further eroded the fragile truce between James and Elena. James found every excuse to stay out longer, a swirl of guilt and desperation fueling his double life. He was making significantly more money from Victoria's projects, enough to keep him ensnared. Every time he resolved to end things, the lure of success pulled him back. The hush money commissions, the exclusive connections, and even Victoria's dangerous allure seemed more real to him than his domestic duties at home. For Elena, motherhood was a battle she fought alone. She struggled with postpartum fatigue, dealing with Aurora's irregular sleeping schedule, and navigating a sense of isolation that enveloped her like a fog. Occasionally, her parents would drive from Clearwater Bay to help with the baby, but she never told them the whole truth. She was too ashamed to admit that her marriage was crumbling. The only person who knew the full extent was Carmen, and Carmen was growing more concerned with each passing day. Meanwhile, rumors about James's infidelity circulated in the small community. Hawthorne Hills was no city of anonymity. Word traveled swiftly. Whispers about James's frequent absences and the flashy car Victoria often lent him were the kind of gossip that fueled local coffee shop chatter. Yet for a while, Elena managed to keep her head high, refusing to lend credence to rumors. She had Aurora to focus on, and the newborn's well-being came first. But the final blow to her resolve landed on a cold February afternoon. Aurora had fallen ill with a persistent fever. Worried, Elena called James repeatedly. Voicemail, voicemail, voicemail. Desperate, she tried to drive to the insurance firm, only to find out from a front desk secretary that James wasn't in. In fact, the secretary confided he hadn't shown up to the office in weeks, only calling in to handle major deals from outside. Alarm bells went off in Elena's mind. Where was he spending all his time? Fearing for Aurora's health, Elena rushed her to the pediatrician alone. The baby had a mild flu, but needed watchful care and possibly an overnight observation at the hospital. Elena found herself pacing the sterile hallway once more, memories of her own emergency a few months ago flooding back. Yet again, James was nowhere in sight. She called and texted, her messages becoming more frantic as hours passed with no response. In truth, James was with Victoria at an exclusive ski resort on the outskirts of the state, finalizing a partnership with a high-profile client from Montreal. He'd left his phone charging in the car, oblivious to Elena's dire situation. Later that evening, when he finally checked his messages, a pit of dread formed in his stomach. Dozens of missed calls from Elena and Carmen. He grabbed his luggage, made a hasty excuse to Victoria, and sped back toward Hawthorne Hills. By the time he arrived at the hospital, Elena was in the pediatric ward, cradling Aurora in her arms. The baby had finally settled down, her fever responding to medication. Elena's eyes flickered with a cold fury when James entered. She said nothing. She didn't have to. The unspoken accusation, "Where were you when I needed you?" hung in the air. Carmen pulled him aside. "I want you to look at your daughter," she snapped. "She could have gotten worse without immediate care. And you were off doing God knows what." James mumbled an apology, but it was too little, too late. That night, as Aurora slept in a hospital crib, Elena made up her mind. Enough was enough. She was done waiting, done believing in half-truths and false reassurances. When Aurora was discharged the next day, Elena confronted James the moment they stepped into their house. She told him that if he walked out on them again, if he so much as missed another phone call, he shouldn't bother coming back at all. James backed into a corner, nodded mechanically. He promised to do better, to quit the late-night escapades, to dedicate himself to his family. Elena's eyes remained cold. She'd heard empty promises before. Both of them sensed an impending storm on the horizon. Their once blissful marriage was now a rickety structure, battered by betrayal, ambition, and neglect. It was only a matter of time before it collapsed spectacularly. The final unraveling occurred on an otherwise ordinary Sunday afternoon. Elena's parents planned to visit, eager to spend time with their granddaughter. In a feeble attempt to play the devoted husband, James prepared a family lunch in the backyard. He grilled steaks, set out folding chairs, and even arranged a small vase of fresh flowers for the table. The Ramirez family arrived, cooing over Aurora and exchanging warm hugs. For a moment, it seemed almost normal, like they were still the happy couple they once pretended to be. But as they sat down to eat, Elena's father, George, casually mentioned a rumor he'd heard from a distant relative who worked in the city. "I heard James is doing big deals with some high-end real estate tycoon named Victoria Chen. They say the payouts are enormous." Elena's mother, Lucia, smiled, unknowing of the storm behind her daughter's eyes. "That's wonderful, James. Congratulations. But you must be so busy these days." James froze, the tongs in his hand trembling slightly. Elena's grip on her fork tightened until her knuckles turned white. She forced a neutral smile. "Yes, James has been quite busy," she said, her voice dripping with a tension only he could decipher. George turned to his daughter. "So, when do we get to meet this Victoria Chen?" he asked innocently. "Is she someone you interact with too, Elena?" Elena set her fork down. Her eyes flickered toward James. "I haven't had the pleasure," she said quietly. James swallowed hard, feeling beads of sweat form at his temple. The rest of the meal played out in a strained silence, broken by small talk about Aurora and the chilly weather forecast. After the Ramirez family departed, Elena went to the living room, baby in her arms. James followed hesitantly. He tried to make conversation, but she cut him off. "I'm not doing this anymore," Elena said, her voice trembling. "I'm tired of the lies, the excuses. I know you're with her, James. I'm not blind." Caught off guard by her directness, James stammered, "Elena, it's complicated. It's actually very simple. You're betraying me and our child for another woman." She set Aurora in her bassinet, face hardening. "I trusted you. I believed you were working to build a future for us. But all you've done is feast on luxury while we starve for your time, your support, everything that matters." James tried to formulate a response, but words failed him. Guilt and panic twisted his insides. "I never meant to hurt you," he finally managed, which sounded pathetically inadequate. Elena's eyes flashed. "But you did. And now it's too late to pretend otherwise. Take your things and go." He stared at her in disbelief. She had never asked him to leave before, "Elena, please," he whispered, taking a step forward. She recoiled. "Leave," she repeated, picking up her crying baby, "or I will." Stricken, James hurried to the bedroom, tossing clothes into a duffel bag without really knowing what he was doing. His mind buzzed with conflicting thoughts, rage at the situation, regret for his actions, fear for the future. He wanted to blame someone, something, Victoria for luring him in, or Elena for not understanding his ambition, but deep down he knew the blame was solely his. As he left the house, he glanced at the living room one more time. Elena was rocking Aurora, her back turned to him. He wanted to say something, to fix it, but the chasm between them had grown too wide. In a numb daze, he drove off, eventually winding up at Victoria's modern condo in the city. She seemed utterly unfazed by his sudden arrival. "So you finally left," she remarked with a cool smirk. "Took you long enough." At first, James tried to see it as a fresh start, rationalizing that he would figure things out. But there was no comforting warmth in Victoria's arms, just a void filled with transactional intimacy. At work, rumors spiraled that James had split from his wife. Some co-workers pitied him, others snickered behind his back. He still managed to secure some deals with Victoria's help, but at night he felt a gnawing emptiness. Days turned into weeks. James tried calling Elena, but she never picked up. The most he got were updates from Carmen, curt and always about Aurora's well-being. "She's fine. Don't worry about her." No mention of Elena's feelings or whether she wanted him back. James sank deeper into despair. He kept up appearances around Victoria, but the spark had faded. He couldn't even find the same thrill in her extravagant gifts. Instead, an inescapable dread settled over him, a dread that his life had taken a wrong turn he couldn't correct. As the months slipped by, James became more entrenched in Victoria's ventures. She secured him an executive position in a new development company. She was launching Green Horizon Real Estate. The salary was astronomical compared to his old insurance job. The perks were endless: a luxury sedan, a penthouse apartment temporarily in Victoria's name, and a corporate card with practically no limit. Yet, James found no real joy in it. Every success seemed hollow when set against the backdrop of what he'd lost. Worse still, cracks began to appear in Victoria's empire. Rumors circulated about risky investments, suspicious land deals, and questionable backdoor negotiations. Journalists started sniffing around, linking Victoria's name to a money laundering operation. And James, as her public face in some deals, became a person of interest for investigators. The once glittering life turned sour. Official letters from regulatory bodies arrived, summoning James for interviews. Fear replaced whatever excitement he once felt about climbing the social ladder. In the meantime, Elena faced her own battles. She went back to work as soon as her maternity leave ended. Balancing the demands of teaching with caring for Aurora was exhausting, but she managed. Her colleagues admired her resilience, unaware of the heartbreak that fueled it. Carmen remained a steadfast supporter, helping babysit Aurora whenever Elena was overwhelmed. Despite her sadness, Elena discovered a new strength within herself. She focused on her daughter, took online courses in educational leadership, and began forging a path toward administrative roles in the school district. The initial plan was just to provide a more secure future for Aurora, but soon Elena found she enjoyed the challenge. She liked shaping policy, helping disadvantaged kids, and making a broader impact than just within her classroom. With each small victory, her confidence grew. Back in the city, James's world came crashing down when Victoria was implicated in a high-profile scandal. Investors pulled out of her developments, law enforcement officials raided Green Horizon's headquarters, and the media had a field day exposing every skeleton in Victoria's closet. Despite her wealth and connections, the scandal was too big to bury. Victoria's assets were frozen and her business accounts seized. Suddenly, she couldn't afford the lavish lifestyle she had dangled before James. And James? He became the designated fall guy. As the lead insurance and legal liaison for some of Victoria's most controversial deals, he was the easiest scapegoat. He found himself bombarded with lawsuits alleging fraud and misrepresentation. The luxurious penthouse and the corporate car vanished overnight. The cunning woman he had sacrificed everything for turned cold and distant, blaming him for mishandling her affairs. Their relationship, never built on a genuine foundation, crumbled under legal scrutiny. Faced with mounting legal fees and zero savings, James had frittered away his bonuses on extravagance. He was left adrift. Even his old insurance firm refused to take him back. The community of Hawthorne Hills turned against him, deeming him a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. Friends he once had ghosted him. With no one else to turn to, James swallowed his pride and reached out to Elena. He expected a barrage of insults, an immediate hang-up, but to his surprise, Elena answered his call. Her voice was steady, if distant. "James, it's been a long time," she said. He could hear Aurora babbling in the background and felt a surge of longing for the daughter he hardly knew. He poured out his predicament, unemployed, facing lawsuits, living in a run-down motel. There was a lengthy pause on the line. Then, softly, Elena said, "Let me think." The conversation ended there. Over the next few days, James struggled to keep afloat. Debtors hounded him. Lawyers demanded answers he didn't have. He was on the brink of homelessness when Elena finally called back. "I've arranged for you to meet someone," she told him. "Show up at 9 a.m. tomorrow at this address." She texted an office location in Clearwater Bay. That next morning, James arrived at a sleek new building, the sign out front reading Aurora Rising Educational Foundation. He stepped inside, heart pounding. The receptionist directed him to the top floor. There, in a modern but welcoming office, sat Elena, poised, confident, and surprisingly in control. She rose to greet him, her hair pulled back in a simple bun. "Welcome to my foundation," she said calmly. James's eyes widened in disbelief. "Your foundation?" Elena nodded. "After everything that happened, I decided to turn my passion for teaching into something bigger. With some help from my parents and a few grants, I launched Aurora Rising. We offer educational programs, mentorship, and community outreach, focusing on disadvantaged youth. It's grown much faster than I expected." James looked around, noticing the bustling office staff, the framed photos of outreach events on the walls, the hint of pride in Elena's gaze. She sat down behind a large desk, and he took a seat across from her, feeling more like a defendant than a job applicant. "You said you needed work," Elena stated, her hands clasped. "We need someone to handle administrative coordination, managing grants, drafting proposals, overseeing logistics. It's not glamorous, and the pay is modest. But it's honest work. No shady deals. No hidden agendas." James's cheeks flushed. Why are you helping me?" he asked, voice trembling. Elena took a moment to consider her answer. "Because Aurora deserves a father who isn't living on the streets," she said. "Because at one point I did love you. And maybe, because I've come out stronger from all this, I can afford to show you some compassion." The weight of her words made James bow his head. He nodded, swallowing his pride. I accept," he whispered. And so, in a cruel twist of fate, James began working for the woman he had betrayed, the same woman he had starved of emotional and financial support while lavishing feasts on his mistress. Now he organized her staff schedules, booked meeting venues, and followed her directives as she expanded Aurora Rising's scope. Each day was a humbling reminder of how far he had fallen and how much Elena had grown. Within weeks, it became clear that Elena was not the same naive, trusting wife James once knew. She was firm but fair as an employer, setting strict deadlines and holding everyone accountable, especially James. Though her eyes occasionally betrayed a flicker of hurt when she looked at him, she never let personal history cloud her professional judgment. She treated James as she would any staff member, offering constructive criticism and setting clear expectations. James worked diligently, partly out of desperation, partly out of a newfound respect for Elena. He filed reports, coordinated volunteer events, and even accompanied staff on site visits to local schools. In these interactions, he saw the impact of Elena's mission. Kids from underprivileged backgrounds lit up when given opportunities to learn computer skills or receive tutoring. Community centers bustled with hopeful energy thanks to Elena's grants. One afternoon, James found himself at a charity event where Aurora Rising partnered with Carmen Delgado's medical outreach. Carmen, busy directing volunteers, paused briefly to regard James with a mixture of wariness and something close to pity. "Well, at least you're doing something worthwhile now," she said brusquely, then moved on. James couldn't blame her for her coldness. He had hurt her best friend in the worst possible way. Amid the paperwork and logistical planning, James's greatest challenge was learning how to be a father to Aurora. Elena allowed him supervised visits, more for Aurora's benefit than for his. He'd meet them at a nearby park on weekend mornings. The first time, Aurora clung to Elena's legs, cautious around the man she hardly knew. Each subsequent visit, however, Aurora grew more comfortable. She tentatively accepted a toy from James, let him push her on the swings, and even giggled when he attempted a silly face. These small steps renewed a spark of hope in James, though he dared not assume it meant forgiveness. At Aurora Rising, James learned about patience and humility. He saw how passionately Elena fought for children's education, how she wrote heartfelt speeches for local town halls and personally supervised scholarships for single mothers. The more he witnessed her dedication, the more he realized how he had failed her and himself when he let his greed and vanity override his sense of duty and love. As the months passed, James's legal battles began to settle. Investigations revealed that while he had indeed facilitated some questionable deals, the bulk of the wrongdoing fell squarely on Victoria. Still, he was slapped with fines that left him financially crippled. Through it all, Elena neither gloated nor offered pity. She simply let justice run its course, focusing on her foundation and her daughter. Slowly, James rebuilt a semblance of stability. He rented a modest apartment and lived paycheck to paycheck. He rarely saw Victoria, who was now embroiled in courtroom dramas, her empire in ruins. Stories surfaced of her fleeing the country or hiding in some remote villa, but none were confirmed. In quiet moments, James reflected on the irony of it all, how swiftly fortune had pivoted, how ephemeral his taste of the high life had been. One evening, after a particularly successful fundraiser, Elena invited James to stay late for a debrief with the management team. When everyone else left, she asked James to linger. The office was calm, only the hum of the air conditioner breaking the silence. She thanked him for his work. "We exceeded our fundraising goal tonight," she said, a hint of a smile on her lips. "That's partly thanks to the outreach you coordinated." James nodded, swallowing the knot in his throat. "I'm just grateful to have this opportunity to do something meaningful." She studied his face. "I see that you've changed, at least in how you approach your responsibilities here. But there's a lot of damage that can't be undone. You know that, right?" His eyes fell to the floor. "Yes, I know." Elena sighed softly. "I don't know what the future holds for us personally, James, but Aurora is my priority now. If you want to be part of her life, earn it. Show me you've truly learned from your mistakes." He nodded, tears threatening to spill. "I will, Elena. I promise." And in that moment, James recognized the profound weight of karma. The feast he'd served to his mistress had resulted in a famine of the soul, one that only true repentance and daily effort could ever begin to remedy. Sometimes the cruelest betrayals pave the way for the greatest transformations. James White sacrificed his marriage and nearly lost his daughter, all for the thrill of wealth and power. Karma took its pound of flesh, leaving him with nothing but regret and a daunting path toward redemption. Yet, life granted him a second chance, working under the very woman he once neglected, Elena. In the end, every step he takes in rebuilding trust is a reminder that what truly matters can't be bought with money or lust, but earned through genuine remorse and unwavering dedication. If you found this story compelling, full of drama, heartbreak, and a taste of hard-earned redemption, please hit that like button, share it with friends who love a good twist of fate, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel for more riveting real-life drama and inspiring tales. Your support helps us bring you the stories that matter most. Thank you for watching.